I'm sure your mother will wish to move on. Back to Old Town, perhaps? Our climate doesn't seem to suit her.
There's nothing for her there. I'm all she has left.
There's Helena.
No. You'll stay with us.
We're out of wood.
Welcome, everyone, to A Cast of Kings, a decoding TV podcast about the HBO original series House of the Dragon. I, as always, am one of your hosts, Jessie Earl, and it has been several years since I read Fire and Blood, the book upon which House of the Dragon is based, and I am joined by the author of the unofficial guide to Game of Thrones, my friend and fellow co-host.
I'm Kim Renfro, and
Yay!
I have reread Fire and Blood many times. I have been trying to get out of the weeds here on all of the details, but I am the more diligent one, aside from a mea culpa that I will make a little bit later in the show. But first, what are we talking about today, Jessie?
Yes, well, we'll get to your mea culpa later. But today we are breaking down Season 3, Episode 7, titled The Dragon in Winter, written by Philippa Goslett and Zenzel Price, hopefully I'm saying those names correctly, and directed by Nina Lopez Corrado, all of whom are new to these roles on the show, at least as far as I could find, except Philippa, who wrote Episode 5 of this season and has been an executive producer on the show in previous seasons. Now, before we get into the episode proper, please don't forget, if you want to support shows like A Cast of Kings, please consider becoming a paid subscriber at decodingtv.com to get ad-free episodes of the show, as well as our bonus episode where Kim and I go into all the differences between the show and the book. And with all that said, we're going to get into the nettles of our spoiler-free thoughts on Season 3, Episode 7 of House of the Dragon. But before we jump into our full recap and review, we are going to talk spoiler-free. But I also want to quickly announce before we get started that I know House of the Dragon Season 3 is coming to an end next week. Sad face, we cry. But don't be too sad, because we're going to be continuing even after the season has ended. We're definitely going to be releasing a full season wrap-up episode after the season ends. So you're going to get an episode about just the finale next week. And then a few days later, we're going to release for everyone a bonus episode where we'll go into a full wrap-up on the season, our full thoughts on everything that happened. And then Kim and I have been loving doing this show with all of you. We've been loving the feedback. We've been loving hanging out with each other. So we're currently talking to each other about possibly doing more episodes of this show, about other shows and other things after that. But we'll have more announcements on that hopefully very soon. So all that is to say, stay subscribed. Don't just hit unsubscribe as soon as the season ends, because we'll have more stuff for you. But for now, let us jump into our spoiler-free thoughts on Episode 7. Kim, what'd you think?
They got me back a little bit this week.
Really?
From last week. Again, big roller coaster of emotions. I feel like I've been going through this whole season. But yeah, I thought that there was some really good payoff here in this episode for a few of these storylines that I personally have been a bit bemused by. And I think that we've shared in that. Really incredible range of dragon action in this episode.
Definitely got some dragon action.
Like, hands covering my face. I was terrified moments. And then I really loved some of the beautiful time that we spent with Helena in this episode. So there's sort of like a trickle going on with the pacing of this season, where it's like trickles of tension and then like these big bursts of confrontation. And that felt really frustrating last week, and a lot of things didn't work. This week worked a bit better for me, but there were still some low points. So I'm excited to talk more specifically about them.
Yeah, because I'm very excited about this, because I did not like this episode at all. Well, okay, that's being a little too hard. There's things that I do like in this episode, but there are things in this episode that, like, I enjoy the spectacle of it. Again, love the dragon action. Though I will also have emotions about that. My boy, what are they doing to my boy? Sheepstealer did nothing wrong. I'm just like the Godfather. Like, they massacred my boy. So I enjoy the spectacle of some of the things, and there are some storylines here that I do like that we'll get into. But overall, the two major developments in this episode, I am just sitting here being like, what are we doing? What's the plan? This is the plan now? This is what, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, let me put it this way. This is starting to get to the resolution of some storylines that I have been kind of frustrated with all season. And now that we're getting to those moments of culmination and I see, oh, this is where they were leading to, I'm just sort of sitting here being like, oh, this is what this was all for. I'm kind of frustrated and I kind of hate it. And I was feeling that this is the direction that it was all going in for a while. But now that we've finally officially gotten there, I kind of go, what was the kind of the point of all of this if this is where you're ultimately headed with it? I know I'm kind of staying vague and we'll get into some specifics, but yeah, I come away from this episode feeling very frustrated with the resolutions that we did get on a few things. And again, there are other moments in this episode that I really love. We'll get into it, but everything with Aegon, I really liked. That was great. And there's also a few other bits and spurts throughout the episode that I like, but on the whole, I'm kind of down on it, which I'm excited about because you and I generally really agree on stuff, and so I'm glad that we actually have like a disagreement. I think that's fun. That's cool conversation,
especially
so
like
it'll be good.
Right leading into the finale. This is a really interesting place for there to be divergences on like what's working and what's not.
Yeah, it'll be kind of interesting, and maybe the finale will be flipped. Like I'll love the finale, and you'll despise it. It'll be fascinating. But yeah, no, that's cool. I'm excited to get into it with you because it's always fun to have disagreements with people. So at least people I respect. Let me put it that way. But before we get into that, you said a few minutes ago you have a mea culpa, which I also realized after we did it and after the episode got released. I'm like, oh yeah, shoot, yeah, because my partner. I will say my partner corrected me on it. I'm like, oh, fuck. So I'll toss it to you, but I will also take ownership of it. It's not just on you.
Yeah, we, again, I'm going to stay vague in this for the sake of spoilers, but people are free to look at our bonus episode that will come out later this week. Listen to that if you want me to go into like the specifics of what was missed. I am still trying to like preserve a bit of what I believe is mystery going on.
Spoilers,
yes. And again, part of this mystery is derived from the fact that we're working from like a unique fictional history text here and a pretty complex timeline of adaptation in the show. And so all that to say, I absolutely misremembered / entirely forgot where a certain set of characters is heading later on in the Fire and Blood text, according to this section of Fire and Blood text that we have from George R. R. Martin. I wrote this jokingly, but I will just say it anyways. I am awash in dilemmas and deficiencies. Much like Rhaenyra, I am very much relating to her in my own personal life. And so I never want that to impact listeners' ability to trust that like you are getting reliable information from me and Jessie here, both about what is true in the books, quote unquote true, what is published, what has been kind of inferred from fans, and what we think is just being straight up invented by the writers for the purpose of this adaptation and for the purpose of them having this show canon. So again, please listen to our bonus episode for the full accurate details about which I'm speaking cryptically here.
And I'll say for listeners who don't get the bonus episode, nothing in the main episode. We kind of alluded to some stuff in the main episode that kind of hints at some book related stuff, but all of our feelings, I think, on the scenes in general are fully fine. So nothing we got necessarily wrong or our reaction to it. It's just a certain, let's just say, romance storyline is headed in the show. We forgot when we were talking about in the bonus episode. So just wanted to acknowledge that, but yeah, we'll talk about that more specifically and in greater detail in the bonus episode.
I do just think it's funny that like even in this apology though, people aren't going to know what we're referring to.
Yeah, they're gonna be
because
like, what the hell are you talking
there are
about?
multiple like surprise kiss romances that have happened. So lucky us that we have all this to parse through.
But we just wanted to call it out for all of you listeners who correctly call this out in the comments and in emails. So we just want to touch on that. And speaking of comments and emails, we got a couple quick emails that I wanted to talk about here. We got one email from Gretchen. Thank you, Gretchen, who said, you both sort of touched on what I've been feeling this season, which is that I don't feel connected to most of the characters other than Rhaenyra and Alicent. when characters like Jace and Kristen Cole are killed, I don't feel much at all. I can tell from the dramatic effect that the show wants me to care as much as I did for the characters like Oberyn or Robb Stark. However, I don't feel like I know Jace and Kristen Cole like I knew many of the characters in Game of Thrones. I wish this show spent a little bit more time building the characters and showing us the bond the key dragon riders have with the dragons. Seeing even one scene of Aegon or Jace bonding with the dragons would have given them and their dragons' deaths the impact they deserve. Well, this episode may help you with Aegon, I think, in a good regard. But I will sort of say I agree and disagree with this comment because I think I totally agree on the Jace one, and I think it's part of the problem that the show is still having loaded upon effects on from season 1 of the speed run of the timeline.
Mm-hmm.
I really feel like season 1 should have been a little bit slower, and that should have been probably 2 seasons or maybe a season and a half instead of 1 season. Because I feel like then we could have gotten more time with Jace as a young kid and gotten to know him a little bit more and see him grow up and get those connections and those different feelings that he had, and also the connection with the dragon.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel that Kristen Cole, I disagree on that one just because I feel like last season, we've had enough with him throughout the seasons. And then last episode, it was kind of supposed to be this anticlimactic death where you're kind of a little bit numb to it all. Like he's trying to make a big deal out of it. And then it just ends like in this anticlimactic, no, we're not going to feel anything for him kind of death.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of worked towards the effect the show was going for with that, even though we've had our own criticisms in the bonus episode about those sequences, or at least I did. So I kind of like that there. And then Aegon, I feel like he's definitely getting some good stuff with his dragon this episode to stay spoiler free. So and has in previous episodes of this season. So yeah, Kim, anything to say to all that?
Just that, yeah, it does feel like it's a bit of a feature, not a bug, I suppose, when it comes to this particular story. But again, I understand why that can lead to like this like frustration that I think is a word that like we kind of keep going back to, where like at some point it's not as your mileage may vary, but it's not as enjoyable sometimes to watch characters just struggle through things and fail when you also then don't have a ton of personal attachment to them, which unfortunately seems to keep happening. But that's kind of the nature, again, of George R. R. Martin's story that he's telling here, is that not a lot of good things happen, particularly not if you're a good-hearted person.
Definitely not if you're a good-hearted person in the Game of Thrones. Yeah, it's like you can be a good-hearted. I think you like the thing that Dunk and Egg I think kind of showcased to me is like, and I loved that show so much, is that you can be a good-hearted person in the world of Game of Thrones, but if you are in the realm of power and seeking power, or being around people who are seeking power and being in service of people seeking power, a good-natured heart doesn't serve you, because ultimately that runs counter to the incentives that are placed in front of you to seek out power. And that's sort of been what this show has been discussing. And I like putting those shows kind of in conversation that way. And Game of Thrones itself, the original series, was also very much about that. That's why Ned Stark got killed, because he was an honorable man in a world where honor is not necessarily the thing that'll help you win the day, unlike most other stories. So yeah, I think that's an interesting sort of point to sort of talk about whether or not being a good person serves you or not in these worlds. And maybe we should build a world in which we incentivize being a good person instead of realms of power. But I'll leave my anarchism speech there.
I always love the anarchism speeches. Yeah, I think that Daron is an interesting example of that in this episode, where like sometimes maybe it also just does come down to like where the writing is resonating with folks, and like whether we got enough scenes like we saw with Daron in this episode, about his willingness to be insignificant in history if it means doing what he feels is the right thing. Whereas Jace, it is interesting to me that the final moments we got with him, this like interiority, was kind of him in this like fervor and bit of like an irrational state of mind that he like whisked Bela into, and now we are still watching Bela and Rhaena suffer the consequences for that decision. So yeah, I can relate to like, I did not feel the same gut punch of learning about Jace's death in the book, nor really watching it on the show, as I did with someone like Robb Stark.
Yeah.
But at some point, it's like an apples to oranges text that we are adapting here, and therefore different tasks that the writers have been set. And yeah, the successes or weak spots of that, I think, keep getting exposed as we get deeper into like the end game here. Yeah, because we know
And
that we only have one season left, right?
Yep, and one season and an episode left. So we will talk about it in a second because we certainly have thoughts on this. So all that being said, I just want to shout out, if you want to give us feedback on the podcast or have one of your comments possibly read on it for me and Kim to talk about, please send it to acastofkings@gmail.com. I also want to quick shout out Kayla. I'm not going to read your full email on the show just because but it was a very sweet email, and I just want to call it out because it meant a lot to me to read. So thank you for sending that in, Kayla. And I know Kim saw it as well. But with that said, finally, I just want to say, please consider subscribing to watch video versions of this podcast, as well as the main Decoding TV podcast over at youtube.com/@decodingtv, where you get to see our lovely, beautiful faces. We are back here with a Cast of Kings, a Decoding TV podcast where we talk about why all Targaryen boys just want dragon fights. If you don't want to know what new incest we got to see this week as well, be warned, there are spoilers about the episode from here on out. But as usual, just to note, we will not spoil anything from the book, and we'll save all of our discussion about comparisons to the book for our weekly bonus episode, which is available to paid subscribers on decodingtv.com later this week. So head over there to get that. Let's go into the episode with Kim's wonderful breakdown. This week we are going to focus on one location at a time for the most part, going from King's Landing and Rhaenyra's court to Harrenhal and the mother-son witch debauchery, then Rook's Rest and Aegon's revival, and finally Tumbleton. So let us start off with, in this episode, Rhaenyra remains awash in divergences from her goal of ruling judiciously. Her plan to use Alicent as a means to assassinate Aemond goes astoundingly wrong, and her trust in Daemon is fractured when Rhaena is discovered riding sheepstealer. Her risky claim of Aegon's death gets blown up, all the while Ormond Hightower continues to play a volatile game. No wonder she wants Helaena and Mysaria to reassure her that everything is all right. Let's start there. What did you think about all the stuff with Helaena this week?
I thought it was like a beautiful opening to the episode. I think that was part of why, like, I felt like I got pulled back in after feeling a little bit of like this lostness and bitterness from last week. I was like, oh, we're in Helena's dreams. And like the device of us kind of seeing, it almost felt to me like I was watching Helaena choose a pleasant dream for herself, which is like a really simple mode of escape from this castle at what felt to me like dawn, but could have also been like sunset. Just a sense of freedom, and then being awoken by Rhaenyra. And I was very drawn in by that conversation and kind of getting this sense of Rhaenyra's state of mind and her complete lack of ability to just be like present with someone at the moment before she jumps into like all of her insecurities and paranoias and this like survival mode that she's in of needing to be told that everything's all right. And it's very much not all right. And then the episode just kind of keeps going from there with a bit of like that fervor.
Yeah, I found I really like that opening sequence with Rhaenyra where she's trying to talk to Helaena as a sister and being like, because they are sisters. And which again speaks to the fucked upness of the Targaryen line. And it gets at like, she's trying to meet people where they're at, trying to see people, but she's just because of as we've talked about, power corrupts, power distances you. And so she just can't, and she just wants to use Helaena. It's like, what if Daemon, I think you have the notes here, like the Winter Wolves then, like, what can you tell me of all these things? And Helaena doesn't seem to really know these things. She doesn't even, I like seeing her interiority this episode. Something I've been complaining about this whole season, we don't get a lot of interiority in some women characters. And you see what she sees is confusing and weird and not exactly clear in any regard. And so you get this sense of like, I don't know what's going on, girl. Just stop. I just want to just try and live. And it's so confusing and scary and terrifying, especially we get that later sequence where it's like her giving birth. And it's a really like, oh, is she giving birth already? And then you realize, oh, this is a dream. And then she's going to feel like she's going to lose her child immediately
Mhm.
to Rhaenyra. And yeah, so you see all these anxieties and fears, and then she has to wonder if that's her fear or if it's a prophecy. What is it? And I really like that sense of confusion that we get to see with her that we just really never got until this point. And Rhaenyra just demanding things of her because of her own anxieties about holding power, and that just distancing her from this moment that could have been a true connection point with her and Helena. So yeah, I really did like that. Also, what did you think about the prophecy stuff? Because for me, I don't want to say, we'll talk about more in the spoiler section stuff, but there was also the winter coming element that came in there. I'm like, oh, this feels like very Game of Thrones setup stuff to a degree.
Yeah, absolutely felt like a nod to the lore of the White Walkers and this idea that anyone who's been sort of like a dragon dreamer in this line of Targaryens might have truly been getting glimpses of this apocalyptic war to come. It also can just be interpreted, I think, as simply as like winter is literally coming in this season. We've talked about this before, like in this timeline of Fire and Blood is when the seasons happen to be transitioning. And there's a lot of like myth and magic around why seasons are unnaturally long in Westeros or in George R. R. Martin's universes. And yeah, I thought that this scene was also really great at showing how perceptive Helena is, despite having this reputation for being somehow out of touch or on the outside of things within the castle. But she's incredibly perceptive and observant of when Rhaenyra, like when her tone switches, even before Rhaenyra kind of grabs her aggressively. The fact that Rhaenyra has no interest in actually asking her about this pale mare. What popped into my mind when I first heard that, or I think I just said pale mare, gray mare, that's the name of a disease that like ravages the place where Daenerys is staying, is living at one point in the books. And I thought it was interesting. My mind just immediately pinged to that like, yes, this was a peaceful dream, but it's also very possible that Helena was picking up on the idea that there's like disease and destruction and death everywhere, particularly in the castle.
Institutions. Yeah. Well, I also want to talk to you about Rhaenyra, because you have some thoughts on how she's in survival mode this season as well.
Yeah, I don't think I've mentioned this thus far, and I keep meaning to, but the fact that she is always wearing her riding leathers now, ever since Jace's death. And again, the construction of how the Battle of the Gullet and Jace's death unfolded in this show's canon was that Rhaenyra going to her rooms and changing out of her gown that she was in as queen to get into her riding leathers to then ride to battle, that was enough time for Jace to convince a Kingsguard to shut her in her room, keep her from being able to help, and therefore Jace was on his own out there. And again, this episode gets into the blame of Jace's death a lot, which is interesting. I, for one, mostly blame Jace and then the people who have dragon-killing weapons. Like, that's who's at fault.
We'll get there. I have thoughts on that.
Yeah. But I think it very much speaks to Rhaenyra's state of mind that she feels like she needs to be ready to jump on Dragonback at any moment and potentially fly to either her death or like fly to burn and kill people en masse. And it's interesting that we finally see her do that in this episode, and it's only in pursuit of finding out the truth about Sheepstealer's writer. But yeah, I think that plus she's been drinking more heavily in all of the scenes that we see her in, like every small council scene. She's now drinking. They, I think, called extra attention to that with the detail of Corlys not drinking. We'll talk more about what's going on with Corlys, obviously, later when we get to Tumbleton. But like, it means something that she is like in a state of mind, again, as we saw very deeply earlier in the season, where she is like unable to sleep, drinking kind of, that doesn't do anything really well for your senses and thought patterns and memory. And then she is like lashing out and having these, I think, like massive, sure, political gaffes, but also just like interpersonal fractures with people.
Yeah.
And this could have been an opportunity for her to truly connect with Helena, learn something about what Helena's experience has been, Frick, we see, I don't know why Frick just came out of my mouth.
Frick, God, Frick.
I have a toddler. I'm trying not to curse. He repeats everything right now. The epic shot of Helena riding Dreamfire that we got in this scene.
Yeah.
Like, again, so cool, and probably a piece of why I'm like riding a little bit high on this episode.
I'm glad Helena's getting her due in this episode.
Yeah.
Like, she's getting some moments, and I appreciate that.
And you're just, I think similar. I feel the same way about our scenes that we have with Daron. Even like Oscar Tully, there's like this generation of people in this show that I, as the viewer, feel very protective of, or like, gosh, if only there were more people around them, like protecting them and leading them to do the right thing. But instead, they live in this brutal world where like I instead become the spectator going like, yay, Oscar Tully is doing mass murder and saying cool things, but I'm like, he's just a boy.
Yeah, it's the world that they are told to be raised up in, and it's this thing that I find fascinating. I'll kind of keep this quick, where a lot of people say like, well, this is just the world of medieval times, because people relate Game of Thrones to like, obviously very similar feudalistic times that the stories were sort of representing metaphorically. And I always go like, no, it's very similar to today in the sense that like there's systems in place that create these. It wasn't that people were just more innately brutal back then. There were still systems of power that incentivized people to not see each other as human beings. And we're seeing that very clearly with Rhaenyra as a character throughout this season, and losing connection with people. And we even see it with Miss Arya which is a storyline I decently enjoyed this season too, where she wants to be praised and fawned over, but it's distanced her from the world in which she came from. And so we get these tales here, and it's like, no, people weren't inherently brutal. It was the systems in place that did that. And today we have, hopefully some systems that are a little bit more quote unquote civil, but in some ways, sometimes that just hides some of the violence. And there's also still power and brutal natures and awful things, and maybe arguably even more so given the tools that we have, like nuclear weapons as compared to dragons. So I think that there's a reason we resonate with this show on that level, even though this is set in quote unquote like a medieval equivalent time, because people aren't inherently brutal, but the systems incentivize them to do. So again, I look at my Dunk and Egg, my poor little boys. I miss you.
Dunk and Egg was a really beautiful example of how a much more contained, grounded story with like a smaller set of characters can feel both intimate and like it has like these big ripple effect impacts in the universe. And so it's just tough with House of the Dragon that like they really are juggling, similar to Game of Thrones, so many more locations, characters, and
it can be sometimes difficult.
Yeah, I think that was something that I was noticing in this episode too, that maybe relates to like why I liked that shot of Helena in the courtyard. But some of these settings and scenes are starting to feel to me like it's like I'm watching a play, like I'm watching like a stage play.
Oh, I was getting that too. It very much, I feel very the Shakespearean, like when especially the way some scenes are blocked. There's some scenes, especially this, and the Game of Thrones is always going to have that, but there's less naturalistic acting, especially I think in this show and this season, where everything feels a bit more theatrical. Which I don't think is wrong if it fits the vibe. Very well.
But again, maybe leads to a slight a change from what we know we can experience in this world, just again in different adaptations and in different settings and contexts.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because obviously the actors are very grounded in terms like, because when you talk theatrical acting, it's usually big and broader sweeps, but here the language is sort of like more theatrical. The blocking is a little bit more theatrical. Like I noticed there was one scene where the characters were kind of blocked towards the camera, even though that wouldn't necessarily be how they would have been standing normally. And again, I think that that's fine. What I think I like about it is it speaks to the performative nature of this world. And I think that kind of fits versus the more kind of grounded world that we get in Dunk and Egg, or even sometimes in Game of Thrones, the series itself. There's a bit more of a sense of the performativeness of this world. And I think so. I think that is a directing and acting choice works, because it's not that they're just going full theatrical, otherwise they'd just be broad characters like playing to the back seats. they're not doing that.
No.
But there is an intentional choice to evoke that. So I think that's kind of fascinating. Well, speaking of theatrical, at the small council this week, Rhaenyra gets called out by Torrhen Manderly for making him the treasury scapegoat. I loved he's like, I feel like I'm being put up here as some kind of scapegoat. And Mysaria's like, I don't know what you're talking about, bro. I don't know.
I didn't realize there was a name for that. That's exactly what we're doing to you.
Yeah, right. Oh wow, look at you coining that word. You're the real master of coin, I see, in this world. Aha. But Rhaenyra's also been pestered by Lady Frey over Harrenhal. Exasperated, Rhaenyra simply tells Lady Frey to go take the near empty castle, much to her excitement. She was very excited about that. Adam and Baela bring news of sheepstealers' sightings, putting a thrilling confrontation into motion. So we have a little Baela and Adam check in here as well. So what do you think about that little moment between the two of them?
Well, first of all, interesting continuation of last week's Alan and Baela scene.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay, like we are just like head on checking in with this now, I guess, triangle romance going on. I mean, Clinton Liberty, who plays Adam of Hull, continues to be like one of my favorite performers with how much emotion and information he can get across with like a look or a smile or like a little like devastated nod. I was really feeling myself this episode. I was like, okay, Adam, sea smoke and sheepstealer, get out of here. Go save yourself.
Fly off into the sunset. You deserve better, all of you.
Precious little babies. I also thought it was interesting that like all of these check-ins we're doing as everyone is scouting for Vhagar, which interesting that we still never see her, are again, this is where I was kind of like, this makes me think it's more of like stage play setting, is like I was not feeling what I feel when I read Fire and Blood, which is that the fact that Vhagar is flying around to all of these towns and just burning them, destroying everyone in sight, every bridge, every piece of infrastructure, like that this is a devastating, effective, like repeated act of terrorism that is happening in Westeros. And I feel like that's
like almost as if it's akin to like people doing drone bombings, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like not necessarily nuclear weapons, but like just bombing people from far away.
Right.
You know?
And like no one feels safe. There's no predictability of like when or why an attack is going to happen. It is just indiscriminate death and destruction. And again, being carried out seemingly just by Vhagar by herself. But as we're, especially in this episode, kind of taking a closer look at the dragon bonds, I think it brings into mind what exactly what is going on in Aemon's mind, aside from hoping he has sex with his mom someday.
Well, we'll talk. Save that because I have thoughts. I'm holding so many thoughts.
I will, but I think
you can't keep baiting me like this.
I'm so sorry, but I do think that what the show is doing is giving some sense of like the sort of like, again, chaotic viciousness of the type of survival mode Aemond has been living in, and that is just getting taken out on everybody, at least within fire shot of Vhagar at the moment.
Yeah, Targaryen boys just want to see the world burn, you know.
I have we can keep what do Targaryen boys want? So
well, we'll get there to say it. Yeah.
So many things.
So many things. Well, I also just quick say my piece on Baela and Adam. I do think the three of them are really good actors. I said my piece kind of last week about the Alan and Baela romance stuff, and that sort of gets checked in here where Adam seems to want to propose to Baela, be like, let's go off, and then Baela's like, oh, so you've talked to your brother, and then he's like, oh, they were in a love triangle now. Oh no. And I'm just not here for it. I'm not as upset about that as I am other elements of the story. I'm just more like, all right, love triangles, cool. I've watched the CW. That's fine. It's all good. Again, I don't want to be like too hard on it because it's fine. It's not something I'm terribly upset about. But it is a like, okay, we're gonna do a love triangle. Got it. Cool. But I'll leave it there for now. You also just had some quick thoughts on bastards and why names and legitimacy do matter in this world. Do you want to quick talk about that?
Yeah. I fear they won't be quick, but if you're down for a
Go for it. Let's just get a touch on
a
it.
bastards rabbit hole, this is something I've been thinking about a lot this season, since particularly like this split between Corlys and Rhaenyra has happened over him once again shouting about her sons being bastards and this question of the legitimacy of his children. But I think it's worth kind of like recapping for folks how this concept of bastards works in Westeros, and the fact that like a bastard is only ever labeled as such when people know for a fact that the baby was born out of wedlock and like to a non-noble person, to a commoner, to a member of the small folk, and then that person, that baby, is raised outside of the noble person's house, or if they happen to be raised in their house, as like Jon Snow is like the most famous example, it's with a very clear label, that bastard last name, designating them as such, and they are like not given all of the same rights and privileges, and they're effectively like second-class citizens in the house, you know. But it's interesting that like the only way, again, we don't have exact science in Westeros, and so all of this assumption about who can ever be identified or claimed as a bastard relies entirely upon like that interior family unit basically keeping the secrets of who's been having sex with whom, and then relying upon physical traits and attributes to either be subtle or not. But again, like we know that that is not an exact science, and it's that the people of Westeros don't understand exactly how genetics and physical presentation of things like hair color and eye color get passed along. And so the fact that Rhaenyra and Laenor couldn't have children together for whatever reason, like we privately don't know why. They even allude to in the show a little bit that like they tried. So for all we know, Laenor, what's the proper terminology, just like isn't fertile. And like, again, this can happen within Westeros society and does regularly. The only issue is that people drew suspicion upon the boys not having blonde hair the way that Targaryens often do. But again, even in this world, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is a great example of this. Dark-haired Targaryens exist. That it was a change, not to diverge too much into change, but it was a change for the show that Rhaenys had white Targaryen silver hair. Again, this is Laenor's mom, and so therefore Baela, all in the Velaryon Targaryen family. And so I just find it fascinating that again this ties into the fact that like it's purely that Rhaenyra is a woman, that this is even a point of contest among the society, and that if she was a king and as king claimed any children that were literally born from that king's spouse as his own, they would be considered legitimate, no problem. Like that's just how the word goes. And so the fact that like in this episode Rhaenyra is still very much plagued by this question of legitimacy, and Aemond is incredibly dismissive of her power because he has this discrimination against common-born people being named dragon riders. And then all of this ties in by the end of the episode to Ulf, and his desire to basically be somehow handed the respect and dignity of a noble-born person that just seems impossible within the system for anyone to ever get unless they are lucky enough to be born into a very specific bloodline family who are then willing to either cover up or not cover up who is a bastard and who is not. And that's also why it's notable that in these scenes and like in this flash of Helena's dream that there's an idea that a baby will be literally taken straight out of its mother and brought to a royal for like inspection or to do whatever they will with. Again, this complete stripping of power from women in the society while they are literally the only ones able to produce the very heirs or not
that are so coveted.
So coveted, and they will do so until they die. which is again what we saw in the very first episode of the show, with Rhaenyra's mom basically being forced to keep getting pregnant until she had a son or died, and she died, and then the boy that she was growing died too. So like, all that to say, it's a rough world that we're watching here unfold. And it's
very, very much so.
It's understandable that so many people like continue to just like maybe chafe against watching the downtrodden just get more downtrodden, basically for no other reason other than they were born into the wrong quote unquote circumstances in this universe.
I mean, it is something that I have seen with some people with the show bouncing off of it at some discussion with, and it kind of goes even to the email we had earlier of this is just a show of misery in a lot of senses. Like no one's coming out happy in this show. And unlike Game of Thrones, where yes, that show is miserable at times and a lot of terrible things happened in the show, there was always this like greater sense of there were some people we were behind and some hope for the future of like maybe there's something we're building towards, whereas in this show we kind of know it's going to end miserably, given without spoiling anything from the books. Like we know the Targaryen line declines. We can see that in in Game of Thrones itself, in Dunk and Egg, which takes place after this show. So regardless of who wins the Dance of Dragons here, it's gonna just be miserable. In Game of Thrones, you at least have some people that you're like, okay, maybe we can have something good come out of all of this at the end of all of it. And maybe the White Walkers will be defeated. So that's like a win. That's an existential threat that we're stopping. Climate change. Let's stop climate change. All work together on that one. It'd be very positive if we could do that in the real world too. But here in the show, it's just kind of like, a march towards misery. And that can be a tough slog, especially given the world right now. So I get people bouncing off of that, but I'm a miserable person and I will watch it. I will watch it all. No, that is not true. And let us get into the Harrenhal of it all. Alys, who is styled as a lady and maester by Aemond, has the Targaryen prince in her mental clutches. He is dreaming of having sex with his mother, because we just gotta have that Oedipus complex, when it's actually Alys sharing his bed. But upon waking, Aemond finds the real Alicent has arrived. What follows are tense scenes of domesticity and power struggles between the Dowager Queen, her second-born son who has incestuous feelings for her, and his new girlfriend who is smart enough to realize Alicent is trying to murder Aemond. Okay, I'm going to start this off
Please
so that
do.
you can have a positive, we'll end on a positive note. And there's also some specifics in here that I do want to talk about, but I'm just going to talk generally speaking about this. I'm so kind of frustrated with this. The Harrenhal storylines in both seasons have just kind of sucked. And again, I spoke about this last week. I don't care about this. Oh, Aemond is gonna get with Alys now and form their own like Riverlands Targaryen kingdom thing. And it plays into this tropes that I don't particularly like, which is the manipulative witchy woman, because that opening sequence with the Oedipus complex sex scene, it could be read as just Aegon just reading it himself, or just coming up with it himself. There's also given all the witchiness, all of everything, there's an implication that maybe Alys is manipulating him and preying, and like she's clearly in previous episodes explicitly been preying upon these clear Oedipal feelings that she has, or that he has, and sort of playing up like I'm a mother, and he has weird feelings about his own mother. So there's this kind of manipulation thing, and then when Alicent shows up, we get this love triangle thing. Again, it's a love triangle and jealousy sort of thing, and it's given a little bit more interesting tension because Alicent kind of has to play into it, and not as we spoke about with episode 1 of the season, where she's like, I can't tell my son I don't want to fuck him because I need him to trust me. So like that's an actual like interesting tension to a degree, but I just find these like love triangle stuff, especially with a character like Alys, who's a trope I don't like and a character I don't care about even beyond the trope, to be just like, what are we doing here? And I find it so dull. And then we get, I'm not above a dumb joke, but then she says we're out of wood, and I'm like, oh, is that a dick joke? It's just like, oh, there's not enough wood to go around for all the ladies here, is like kind of the vibe I got about it. And I'm like, okay, sure. And we're gonna make Aegon, who is like, Aemond. We got Aemond, who I've always found to be a decently compelling character. Like, I actually found him to be a really interesting character in seasons 1 and 2, and now he's bogged down in this nonsense as well about, like, I just want to fuck my mom, and now I have this other lady who's giving me mommy feelings, and now he's kind of an idiot and getting poisoned by his mom, which is, we'll talk more about that in a second. I'm less overtly upset about that, but it's just, like, kind of plays into this, like, okay, he's being silly sort of thing. And I get it, he's a young kid, but it's just a whole plot line that I don't really like. And then the last thing, this is the most superficial of things for me to complain about. So I just don't like any of the storyline, but the most superficial of thing with me is the actual sex scene with his mom that we got.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mind seeing stuff like that. Like, I know there's some people online, there was some interesting conversation I saw where people were like, oh my God, Olivia Cook's in a humiliation ritual with the show of, like, her being sexually assaulted in earlier sequences and her son kissing her on the first episode and really not meaning anything. And then they have this unnecessary fantasy sequence where she's, like, having sex with her son again. And I'm like, I feel bad for Olivia Cook, but she's an actress. She's paid to do a job. She's getting money. It's fine. So it's like, I get that element of it. And I'm a little bit frustrated more by the earlier stuff in the season about how badly they've treated Allison's character. So, like, I don't think they've treated Allison's character well at all this season, outside of her interesting sequences with Rhaenyra, which I do like this season. But the last thing that I'll say here, and then again, this is just me, but I didn't need to see the sex scene between him and Aemond and Alicent, not because I'm like, don't need to see that sort of stuff and am really like, oh, I don't want to watch it. But for me, the interesting part of these, like, psychosexual storylines is the underlying subtext intention of it. So when you just show me the thing of, like, oh yeah, he wants to fuck his mom, and you just give me that visual as a visual medium, it makes it less interesting to me. Like, and I'm going to be honest, I lived on the internet in the early 2000s. The Oedipal complex, Oedipal, I always get this wrong. Oedipus complex is like bargain basement, like, psychosexual nonsense. Like, I was on fanfiction.net. I know I was on AO3. I know what weird stuff is out there.
Sure.
So, like, that doesn't bother me. But it's like,
the guy who broke both his arms.
Yeah, yes, but it's like, if you're gonna no, I didn't. I'm talking more tentacle stuff. There's weird shit you can do. But so, like, but it's just, if you're gonna do an Oedipus complex, like, it's a complex that I've seen before, and it's not particularly unique in any way. But if you're gonna do, like, psychosexual subtext stuff, that's the one to do. That's the example of it. And so it's fine, and it can add some interesting subtext to scenes. But it's more fun when it's subtext. And when you just show me the text in a fantasy sequence, it just inherently makes the sequences less interesting. And it's already a whole sequence that I already find not interesting for all the reasons I said before. So I just come away from the sequence, rant over, being like, I don't care. I hated it. Sorry. Kim, though, what did you think? I am sorry for my long rant here on this.
Never apologize. I'm sure you're not alone. I feel like this happened last season at some point where I just, like, relented to the fact that, like,
you Stockholm syndromed at Harrenhal.
That there's something going on at Harrenhal that just feels like a quirk of the show more than it feels like a truly integrated piece of this story. And I definitely am. I'm a little apprehensive to see if and how, like, especially, like, again, with it seeming to be like, oh, the whole season is pretty much Aemond at Harrenhal. He gets sent there so fast. But I don't know. It's like I'm just kind of enjoying, like, the camp of it, even though I'm aware that it's, like, not quite meshing with everything else.
I would love it be more camp. Like, if you're gonna do the dick jokes, just keep going. Like, give me like the whole dinner sequence. Just have it be rife with, like, weird camp tension between these two. But it's like, play in the middle. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
not entertaining.
I found myself amused to realize, like, oh, they're doing, like, mom stopped in for a visit after the newlyweds got married, and, like, new wife doesn't want mom there energy. which again felt right. It felt almost like sitcom-y, like on the edge of that, or like just leaning into these tropes for sure.
Yeah, it's like for me, it would have been if you kept it subtextual, and you just had all these like little quips throughout the whole thing. Like the wood joke is like would have stuck out less to me. If it had been a lot of that like little digs that you get, like we get at the small council with Rhaenyra. Like you had Daemon last episode of like, I will not take like suggestions from someone whose biggest battle was with indigestion, like stuff like that, where it's like a little like, okay, there's some barbs here, but there's not really, and so it's kind of dull.
But it was really laid on thick. I'm totally with you there. It's also like interesting to me that part of the device of this plot this season is that there's like no one else around. So like it really is just the three of them. And again, like I picked up on, I presumed pretty quickly that was not the real Alicent in the very first scene.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
But like I found it interesting to then watch Aemond get spooked out by her like saying the same line about "you're all I have left," which is clearly a lie. And like maybe it really is just a testament to Olivia Cook, but like I found it fun to watch Alicent like effectively panic and try to come up with a plan B in a situation where
she's great. Olivia Cook is phenomenal. Nothing against her.
But there was a big part of me that was like, you got here awfully fast, especially after we just, it's like, that's the thing about all the Harrenhal stuff, is that I have to suspend my disbelief more frequently than I need to in other sections, sometimes of like the same episode, which is interesting. But yeah, like Alicent arrives there uncannily quickly, at least in this time, in like this universe. And I'm not saying that people aren't allowed to travel for long days off screen, but like we just did have this whole focus on like what a treacherous journey that can be. And I'm like, they only sent you with one dude, and like that was your whole plan, was for you and this one guy to survive and kill Aemond and then get back. Like, it's a terrible plan.
Yeah, and as soon as Aemond like walked up to him, like, that guy's dead in 2 seconds.
Right.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
And I did, like, I was like, ooh, it's happening in the Godswood. Like, I like this, again, like this device that they have going on of significant or intriguing moments throughout Westerosi history happening in the Godswood, which means it's like a front row seat for anyone with these three-eyed raven powers, as we see Bran have in the later seasons of Game of Thrones. But I was a little like, are we doing the whole like poison is a woman's only weapon thing with Alicent here, where like she clearly she goes and seeks out the dagger, but then spots the poison and decides to use that route. And of course, that is one of the few methods where Alys can now save Aemond from this attack.
Yeah, it's like if she had just stabbed him, it would have been quick and easy and done. And yeah, now Alys will clearly save Aemond next episode. And yeah.
So yeah, it's not like we're polar opposites here, but I think that I don't know. You
just let it wash over you and be like, all right, I'll take it as it comes.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm gonna take the little glimmers from this that I like and just not worry so much about all the stuff that kind of like
how I learned to shut up and start loving Harrenhal.
That's me. But
I agree with you on that. And I also liked your notes here, just to call out your notes here about the stuff that Aemond says about Rhaenyra being very sexist, and she has a woman's heart and a faint heart and a mother's fears, which obviously is going towards Alicent as well, I think, in that sequence there. And so there's some interesting stuff here about like sexism that is being put on display, and the fact that Alicent is using poison, which is the woman's weapon, is kind of interesting. But again, it is going to like, oh, she's going to use the coward's weapon, and that's what it's going to be, and Alys is going to be able to save him. And so it kind of just not, I don't think textually, but in like the symbolism of the show, there's some like giving truth to the like a weakness element of like, oh, if a mother didn't care about her child, like he would have just died. And not that I necessarily think the show wants mothers to be killing children,
no.
But it is sort of like this weird, unclear symbolism that I think this show has kind of gotten muddled in all
Mhm.
of this without really, I think, being very intentional about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, with everything at Harrenhal done, let's jump over to Tumbleton, where Ormond Hightower is holding Lord Corlys Velaryon as some sort of hostage, even though he's like, no, he's not a hostage. Rhaenyra's hand refuses to engage in the game's foot, but seems to clock the tension between Daeron and Ormond during one brief meal. In private, Daeron vents to Gwaine about their seeming lose-lose situation now that Rhaenyra's army is a day's march away, but the young Targaryen refuses to fly himself to safety. What did you think of this sequence?
I continue to really like everything going on in Tumbleton, although I was, especially after like how I was left feeling at the end of last week, I was kind of like, whoa, Corlys is
alive. All right,
just
sure.
Not only is he alive, but he's like being given this meal, and I appreciated like the in episode comment from Corlys basically being like, what kind of trap is going on here?
Why didn't you just kill me? Yeah,
right. And
it's a bit of a false. It was a bit of a false cliffhanger last week. I feel like
they really got me with that for sure.
Yeah.
I think that we've said this before on the pod, but like me and you aren't watching screeners this season, and I don't even watch like the preview for next week's episode. So like I've been pretty siloed in the week-to-week experience, and I'm like, that was a pretty tense cliffhanger to have resolve in this particular way, but I didn't dislike it. I like being taken by surprise.
It's fine.
And I liked this moment. I liked, again, seeing Corlys in the very like capable, I can sit at a table and have difficult political conversations very well type of mindset. Again, like him refusing the drink, I thought was a really great callback to like the earlier days of him on the small council table, and also as a contrast to a lot of the other leaders we see throughout times of war, where it's like, we're going to drink the pain away. But Corlys has always been someone who's like, I'm going to keep my wits about me, and he's wise to do so. And the fact that Corlys was there to kind of catch Ormond's irrational response to Daeron bringing up a very good point, which is like, are you not causing discord and chaos for like no real good reason at the moment?
It's like, well, how does this help us in any way?
And like the fact that like, that question from the supposed king in the room is not okay. You can tell that Corlys kind of clocked the situation immediately. And then I think that Gwaine and Daeron are these little beacons, pun intended, of like relatability, I suppose, for the audience, of like, again, someone
some level
who,
of goodness, or at least has a moral center to a degree.
Exactly, like is attempting to sort of like, follow this faith they were raised in, follow this sort of credo of just like treating people fairly and judiciously, and yet they are both like in this nobility bubble, right? Like Gwaine has killed people, like he's a soldier.
And he's still upholding his house. He cares more about his house than the like overall morality of everything.
Right. Like in the situation that they've set him up in, he is continuing to go along with this war for the sake of protecting Daeron, his family member. Like it seems very much like I think that they are good examples of both trying to keep a greater good in mind while also subject to like the failings and the challenges of deciding what to do when it's your own blood and family members on the line
and legacy. No, I agree with all of that. A few things that I also did really like is Corlys getting upset at the mention of his wife and how Ormond insulted his wife. So I found that to be a really good element there. And the fact that now this is sort of alluded to, that now the people of King's Landing are gonna have a harder time with getting supplies yet again because of this, which is gonna certainly not make things great in King's Landing. We'll see if the show does anything with that, but they certainly set that up with this. And I also really liked Daeron here. He has that line of like, I have no fear of insignificance. Like I do like that he does seem to earnestly like try to be doing like a noble thing and figuring out what to do next without like, I'm trying to aggrandize myself and I'm going to be king. Like he doesn't really seem to care about that. And it makes sense because he never really seemed like he had a good angle at the throne anyways until all of this went down, and he doesn't seem to even want it now, and it's weird with Ormond. So I speaks well to him as an interesting character of like, how do I deal with all of this and try to come out of this right and not just run away. And it's a nice comparison between him and Aegon's later storyline that we'll talk about, where both of them choose to not run away from something that they could have easily done so in. And I think that it speaks interestingly well of both of their character in this. So I really like the Tumbleston stuff as well. It was a good sequence of events. I thought continues to make Ormond an interesting guy. Please don't forget, if you want to support the show, please consider becoming a paid subscriber at decodingtv.com, where you can get ad-free episodes of the show, as well as the bonus episode that we will have comparing the book to the show. But before we jump back into the episode, Kim, where can people find you on the interwebs?
I am still mostly hanging around Instagram these days at Mick_Renfro, RENFRO.
And you can find me at Jessie Gender on YouTube and all of associated platforms, mainly Blue Sky and Instagram. But let us dive into the Rhaena of it all this week. Daemon sneaks away to the Vale after presumably getting the report that Rhaena was being slapped by Lady Arryn. The princess has been trying to track Vhagar, thinking killing the dragon would redeem her in Rhaenyra's eyes, but instead of absolution, Rhaena only finds more painful separation when she's brought back to King's Landing, and sheepstealer is left brutally injured in the wild after a battle with 4 dragons. In a very fascinating dynamic here with all of that, because Daemon sort of shows up, wants to talk to Rhaena, and then I think it was Alan. No, it was Adam. Adam shows up with Rhaenyra, and they sort of have a dragon fight, and sheepstealer gets the brunt of it. Well, I will talk about that first, because I have many thoughts on this storyline. Not positive, if you can guess, but I want to, Kim, you can take the first one on this one.
I think I was just thrilled to see some forward momentum going on with all of this. I was like, whoa, like things are happening, the betrayals are being revealed, and it was very tense, very thrilling for me to try to watch unfold. I literally like caught myself with like my hands covering my mouth. I was like, please, like, not the babies, but I was also like, oh my God, this is what the Dance of the Dragons is. Like, I was like, it's happening again. You know, it's sometimes just feels like the culmination of all of this like anticipation and tension when these dragon on dragon moments boil over. So yeah, I thought it was interesting how much they were leaning into like the like Rhaenyra doesn't know where Daemon is on this errand thing in the first half of the episode. And then, to see them all converge with just, again, like happenstance of timing, like the fact that Baela and Adam spotted sheepstealer. Everyone kept talking about Fair Market. I forget the exact town, but right. It's like everyone's scoutings happened to kind of all overlap at the exact right moment. And so, Daemon finding Rhaena, having again like this very emotional conversation with her, opening up a little bit about his childhood. Like, I do like that we keep getting these shades of like dad Daemon coming out this season.
Daddy Daemon.
That's
speaking of AO3, I'm sure that'll be on there somewhere.
Right. But like, you know, he sort of similar to what we were just talking about with the High Towers, like Daemon's moral compass very much has a limit at his family. But it is really interesting to watch him try to like care so deeply and protect this like small handful of people. And like the moment when Rhaena like screams at him, like, stay back, he does not heed me. And I'm like, yeah, dude, she thinks that sheepstealer is like about to eat you. Like he is that far away from the typical training and control of a Targaryen dragon. I feel like we saw Daemon like rolling around a lot more than we typically do in this whole scene. And that was kind of fun. And again, like this sort of very quick moving, changing dynamics of how the dragons were reacting to each other, especially once Rhaenyra and Cyrax and Sea Smoke and Adam were there, because I almost felt like I could sense the dragon's sense of hierarchy of like, okay, whatever Cyrax does, the other two will follow because of Damon and Adam's current deference to Rhaenyra. Sheepstealer trying to just like get the lay of the land about like what the hell is even going on, you guys. Like I really felt immediately attuned to like this almost bullying atmosphere that Sheepstealer was immediately put in, and feeling so much empathy
Like,
for
leave
him.
me alone, you guys. Is like the kid on the playground who gets beaten
Yeah.
up all the time.
Yeah, like I wasn't doing anything.
Yeah, I just wanted to eat some sheep, damn it. I was going to give my friends my sheep.
Yeah, and I was so relieved that he got away. That I don't know. I came away from that whole sequence being like, that was phenomenal. Like,
so yeah.
Talk to me.
Okay, so here's my thing. Sorry, I may go on another rant.
Please do.
To give praise where it's due, the sequence with the dragons was tense and really cool. I really did like the sequence of like Damon comes down, he just goes right at Rhaena and starts yelling at her, and then Sheepstealer's like gonna go off, and like Damon like falls back. She's like, I don't have control over him, and he's like, oh fuck, and he like falls back, and then the other dragons show up, and that just exacerbates it. And so you have this like powder keg of Sheepstealers just like, stay the fuck away from me, stay the fuck away from my rider. I will protect her, and just like not really having any sense of control, but just like lashing out, and it leading to this really just tense moment as everyone's sort of like Rhaenyra sort of recognizing Damon and yelling at Rhaena and realizing what Rhaena's doing. It's a very well handled sequence in terms of the moment to moment emotions and dynamics at play, with this tension of Sheepstealer just not being a dragon who is under control in any way, and so will just lash out and cause a whole fight. So as a scene unto itself, it is really good. One thing I did hate, though, just to say, is like, what are they doing to my boy?
I know.
My poor sheep. Like, I was just sitting there like the Godfather, like, they massacred my boy. Look what they've done to my boy, because Sheepstealer is the best. And as I've talked about before, the trans community has adopted Sheepstealer so much, just wants to be out there, just living his best life, giving sheep to people, eating sheep. That's all he wants. And he's getting bullied on the playground, as many queer and trans people do, by the other cooler, more popular dragons and the cool kids, with their the legacies, getting the legacy kids with their family for money,
the
showing
cool
up on
names.
the playground. They got the cool bike on the playground, anyways, so it was like, look how they massacred my boy with him in that sequence. But again, effective stuff, because it was like, it really did feel for Sheepstealer really well there. Like, it was just very my partner, she's always very sensitive to animals getting hurt and things, and she literally had to walk away from that scene. She couldn't, because she just felt so much for Sheepstealer.
I believe it.
So that front, praise where it's due. Really well handled action sequence, spectacle, and dynamics within the scene. But I just go back to, I don't like what this has been building to, or what this storyline was for. And I want to refer to two things. One was a video by Princess Weeks that I called out a few weeks ago, that I hope people watched if they got the chance to. But you should watch it. It's a short little video that she did where she talks about, and I'm going to bring up the books a little, no spoilers for future stuff, but I'm going to bring up the book a little here, where in the book, there's a separate character called Nettles who rides Sheepstealer. And in that storyline, without going too deep into it, we don't necessarily know where Nettles comes from. And it's this kind of interesting challenge to this idea that Targaryens are these predestined people to have these dragons. It's like, oh, there's like the lowborn can have them too. And not even just lowborn like Ulf or Hugh, who are bastards, or at least implied to be bastards, as best we know. Like Nettles, we really don't have any true sense of where she comes from, and maybe she does have some bloodlines, but ultimately is this kind of like challenge, like a real challenge to this idea of Targaryen supremacy that gets invited into these halls. And especially if you put in the context of the show, would have been kind of interesting of the sort of like white supremacy sort of angle of this show.
Totally.
To a degree. Sort of like it wouldn't have been the exact same thing, because they've cast people of color in sort of interesting ways in the show, but it would have been an interesting sort of like look at that dynamic within a medieval fantasy world, right? Of like these bloodlines that are supposedly better than us. So that's one thing that the show kind of loses by making it Rhaena. And what they have instead added instead of that kind of interesting thing is this beleaguered sense that like Rhaena feels like she needs to make up for harm done.
Right.
When at the end of the day, like she and Sheepstealer didn't really do anything wrong. And it feels very contrived. And like if it was a little bit more overt, like she had done something wrong,
Mhm.
but it feels to me, and maybe people will disagree with me on this, but it feels a little bit contrived
Mhm.
how much she is given this like sense of like, I'm responsible for Jace's death.
Mhm.
And now Rhaenyra feels that she's responsible for Jace's death. And it's this sort of like put upon storyline. And the thing that I also want to draw people's attention to, there's this wonderful video by my friend Maggie May Fish called, make sure I get the title of it, called Investigating All Her Fault Horror, quote, all her fault horror. And it's a really good video where she discussed this trope in horror movies where there are women characters who are supernatural stuff happens around them and like people around them get killed. And we learn that the supernatural thing stems from their trauma.
Mhm.
Smile is a good example of this without spoiling too much, the Smile movie, as well. I think Smile 2 even more so. And then, the recent Resident Evil game, the newest Resident Evil game, has a very similar trope
Mhm.
where it's like the supernatural stuff comes from this girl's trauma, so she feels the needs to constantly apologize and feel like, oh, it's all my fault.
Mhm.
And then usually, not always, and it's not necessarily the case in this show, but usually also have like male characters who are far more overtly responsible for the harm in a systemic way, kind of be given redemption arcs.
Mhm.
So Resident Evil kind of had that in the newest game as well. Again, go watch Maggie's video; it's really good. But at the point that she makes in that video is that like these women ultimately aren't, it's not really their fault. And so it's this storyline of like, oh, they have to constantly apologize for their trauma and how they've been treated and being put upon by the world. And when it's not really their fault, and the storyline's contrived to kind of agree with that.
Mhm.
And here, this show seems to be doing the same thing with Rhaena, where it's like she's apologizing and her sister's like, well, we're going to do something new now. We're going to try, you have to make up for it. And it's just, in considering how contrived of a reason she feels for that,
Mhm.
it just does not, the punishment doesn't match the crime. And it's just this annoying kind of storyline of she just constantly needs to say, I'm sorry a billion times.
Yeah.
Especially when we don't have her with her, like, I love Daddy Damon. I
Mhm.
like that as a concept, but he didn't have any scenes with her before this season in any notable strong way.
No.
And so it's like, okay, we're like building upon this relationship that we don't have any real on-screen tie to
Mhm.
in a meaningful way. We have stuff with his mother, with her mother that died in season 1, but not with her. And it's like, I wish we'd gotten more of that. So like, basically we're taking away this kind of interesting class discussion from the book and then adding in this like put upon a little bit misogynistic. I'm not going to be so far as like say like, oh, they're like hate women, but like a sexist kind of trope that's like sort of relegating women to these tropey roles and putting this girl of color in that role as well. And what it can adds, the only thing it really adds is like interpersonal family drama that the show didn't lay the groundwork to do to begin with.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so it's kind of like changing an interesting thing to get a less interesting thing that they didn't even bother to set up. So there's some stuff here that I do like the scenes between Daemon and Rhaena are good, but they aren't fully fleshed out to have really feel as emotionally impactful as they could. And then there's some good spectacle here, and I feel totally and completely for Sheepstealer, my little child who I want to protect with all of my heart. But ultimately I just feel like the storyline is just one that I'm like, what are we doing? I'm kind of, it's not the worst thing in the world, but I just sort of feel like it feels very tropey and boring and dull, and especially again compared to the books is less interesting of a thematic concept.
Yeah, it is.
Rant over.
I'm glad to have heard it. It is absolutely true that like the intense focus on Rhaena somehow being responsible for the worst of what everyone's feeling after the Battle of the Gullet is strange. Or just certainly not adding much flavor to what's going on aside from, right, one more person feels bad for a mistake that really wasn't their fault. Because there were a ton more other things going on in that set of events. But right, I'm like, in my mind, maybe I should go rewatch the whole battle episode, but like in my mind, the worst she did was certainly roast several dozen of their own soldiers.
Like that's
Like,
worth saying, like, oh, I'm sorry for, but the
Right.
show gives no attention to
right.
that.
I feel terrible because I've never mass murdered people before, and I did that on
Yeah.
Dragonback. Right. Like, or it's interesting that they are being like bringing in the sense of the bond between her and sheepstealer, that like that they are so close that like she's genuinely like pained to leave him wounded, and like that, like you could tell that she really didn't want to.
It kind of goes to the email we got at the beginning where it was like not these moments between these dragons, like that moment in episode 1 of the season where sheepstealer gives her the sheep. Actually made me feel like that's a good scene between the bond here. But ultimately, because we haven't gotten any follow-up with her as her feelings to sheepstealer, like she would get all this stuff about like, I wanted to be a dragon rider, and so like she says all these things to Lady Arryn or whatever, but because she never has like a moment of caring to sheepstealer, that scene about the sheep makes me feel for sheepstealer. Like it makes like, oh, he's a kind little boy who wants to give, but I don't get a sense of their bond as these two. So it's why, like, in this sequence, I feel a lot for sheepstealer, because the show has actually done a decent amount to characterize sheepstealer, even in this sequence, but not much to characterize Rhaena and her bond with sheepstealer. Sorry, I keep interrupting you. I apologize.
No, I think that's valid. Nothing to apologize for. I'm like, I feel like we wind up meeting in the middle more once we talk through these scenes, because I also, and again, this may be an intentional thing that the episode is doing, but I was feeling really gutted throughout this scene, and after that, Rhaenyra showed no care or concern for Syrax. Really, she continued commanding her. Any of the dragons. But again, that's not the point of going to war with dragons.
Yes, of course.
But like, I was expecting Rhaenyra to show some sort of emotional outburst at how brutally Syrax was at first being bit and attacked. And I was like, oh, but like Rhaenyra was really like keeping her cool, even just like walked away afterwards. And I was feeling similar to how I felt watching some of the episodes of Game of Thrones, where I was like, Jon Snow, if you don't go pet Ghost right now for 5 minutes and let him cuddle you, or like these things that are just, they have to pick and choose exactly how much interaction we're showing. But I thought it was interesting that like we see a lot of Daemon and Caraxes kind of like being a team and reassuring one another after the battle. Obviously, the Sunfire of it all that we'll get into later. But yeah, the fact that Rhaenyra,
like the two dragons like snuggling last episode too.
Yeah, exactly. And like the fact that Rhaenyra seemed distanced from Syrax was again like notable to me, and in a way that I did not like. And maybe that is again by design of the episode, or for me, I'm like, that is an oversight, because I feel like Rhaenyra would be showing more protectiveness or concern. But again, maybe that speaks to the type of queen that she's becoming, that like she felt the most confident out of all of the dragon riders in that scene, that she was going to get away and that like this was going to be fine. Everyone else seemed a bit freaked out.
Like, what's going on? Oh my god.
But she did take command of the situation and get everyone out of there unharmed. So
it's true. Yeah, I just and we kind of didn't touch upon it too, but there's all the stuff with Mysaria and Daemon going on in this episode too, with Mysaria sort of going at Rhaenyra, being like, why do you trust him? And again, I'm less frustrated by it, but it is just one of those things with Rhaenyra where I'm like, I wish I could see her make a good decision,
Yeah.
Because it's just one of those things where she keeps making bad decision after bad decision, which is fine. It's a fine enough storyline. But now we have like Daemon betraying her and her kind of being very willfully ignorant of it, and getting to this sequence at the end here where she's like, I keep looking at that skull, and I was like putting my feelings into it, and you lied to me, and so there's this breakage of trust. And that, again, it's like not interesting, but it just sort of goes to like, I wish I could see Rhaenyra make a good choice and have a good instinct. And she had a couple back in episode 3 when she's like feeding the people, but she hasn't really done that either.
Mhm.
Since then, it's just been this like continual like, look how. I think the show kind of is pointing at this and going like, look how ill-suited Rhaenyra is for this role, and that's fine as a storyline. But I wish there was a little bit more gradation of nuance within it instead of like every single scene you're like, Rhaenyra, girl, why? What are you
Mhm.
doing, my girl? No. And it feels a little one note
Yeah.
in terms of what they were showing of Rhaenyra's character in some regards. And again,
Yeah.
Emma Darcy's playing it great, and even the scenes themselves in isolation are like we were talking about the Helena stuff. Like in isolation, these scenes are all good and
Mhm.
fine, but I think just the sum total of them just does not work in overall context. And I think that's kind of where I'm coming down on this episode in a large part, where it's like outside the Harrenhal stuff, which I just dislike all over. The scenes are not necessarily all bad in and of themselves, but they are kind of bad in a context because they showcase like, oh, we're just repeating these beats and like doing storylines that don't feel like they've earned or had payoff for. Yeah, it's a less bad example of, and I'll end this out here and we can move on to the last thing, but like I think a show that does worse about this but it has a similar problem was the Netflix Avatar show, where if anyone watched that show, don't, it's not good. Watch the original series rather than the live action remake, where they kind of have this whole storyline in the season where like Aang loses Appa, his
Mhm.
animal that is like flying bison in the show, and the show kind of wants you to like feel for the fact that he lost Appa, but did none of the work to like give moments of him bonding with Appa, and so it's emotionally vapid
Mm.
in context. And it's like the show has all of these events. A friend of mine, Big Joel, released a video about this, where it's like the scene has events like that happen,
Mhm.
and their scenes are fine in and of themselves,
Mhm.
but they have no tether or context, or the context that is around them isn't building them up. And I keep and this show is not as bad as that. It's not so isolated from itself as the Avatar show, but it has that's sort of a stronger example of a similar point.
Mhm.
So,
And my final point or thought on it is on the Reina of it all is that I do agree that it feels like mostly the decisions being made around her character do not seem to serve her character and motivations
no.
as much as they absolutely serve what is going on with Daemon and Rhaenyra, and it is a device in which Myssaria's like loyalties and information or lack thereof is getting kind of like manipulated.
Yeah, and I will call out. This isn't for me to say too much, but I do want to call out. I know there have been critics of color who have been pointing out that problem of like, oh, we're kind of torturing this black girl character in service of these other characters' arcs,
Mhm.
and so it's like she's just here to service these two other characters' arcs, and is just getting tortured
Yeah.
and getting feeling like she herself has to be put upon,
Yeah.
like she carries all this guilt and blame, and it's all being done in service of other characters' arcs, and it's also physically torturing her and sheepstealer,
Right.
our trans icon. And so I know there's been criticisms from black creators
Mhm.
about that element of the show. And
Yeah.
again, I would say go seek out those creators. You should be listening to their
Yeah.
criticism. I think it's interesting.
And I loved
It's worth listening to.
absolutely. And I loved Bela getting to hug her and have like a little bit of that moment of
Yeah.
absolution, but it did add to the like, okay, so now what? Okay, so then what
Mhm.
was all this for? The finale of the season is next week, and I'm left unclear still with like what the purpose of
All of this was.
all of this was for those two characters, not simply for Daemon and Rhaenyra.
Well, moving on to something I find a little bit more interesting. Rhaenyra can't sleep after her and Daemon barely repair the large rupture between them over Rhaena, so she seeks out Mysaria. At first, they argue over the manipulation Mysaria was attempting when it came to Daemon standing with the queen, but the power shifts when Rhaenyra's vulnerability and need for assurance comes to the forefront. The two kiss and seem to engage in an established routine of sexual intimacy. Yay! Explicit queerness on the show. Huzzah!
They did it!
Yay! They did the thing. They fucked on camera. Not that I needed it to be fucking, but explicit acknowledgement of the queer relationship. What do you think of this sequence? I'll toss it to you because I have my rant.
This was another time when I was like, didn't quite know where the scene was going and found myself pleasantly surprised and was like, okay, like, you're doing it. Me and Jessie have been talking about this. And I was like, it's happening. And I liked, again, like the performances here from Emma Darcy and Sonoya Mizuno, like the way that each character either like softens or hardens at like a particular line. The way that I like as soon as Massaria came like waist right up to eyesight level of Rhaenyra, I was
like, all right, I see it.
I was like, is something happening? Are they once again gonna let this just be like a subtle nod at sexual romance between them? And then like, no, like the scene kept going, and I was like, great, cool, it's here. I think that it's really interesting again to have to especially to have had the scene earlier with Madame Sylvie, I believe is her name, is like the woman. This is again tying into the Aemond of it all. Like, this is the same woman who basically helped at a very young age Aemond. I think that she was the one who like took Aemond's virginity at the insistence of Aegon, if I'm remembering correctly. And if not, then it was established that she was like the woman running the brothel where Aemond would regularly come to have his mommy complex soothed.
Satiated.
And so the fact that she calls out Massaria earlier in the episode for like, what does she say? Have you styled yourself a champion in order to access these halls? You thrill to a tune you once abhorred. What power do you have in truth except to flatter and cajole? And then like to watch it happen in real time in this scene with Rhaenyra, where like Massaria feels like her back's against the wall a little bit. She's been caught kind of, trying to like egg on Rhaenyra's discord with Daemon. And truly the resolution between them and the way that they stay connected and that their relationship is maintained and this trust is maintained is by Massaria recognizing the moment when Rhaenyra needs a bit of cajoling and a bit of like reassurance. And her clear, I think it reminded me of like the scene with Daeron and Ormond, where like you get a sense that this isn't the first time this has happened, that Rhaenyra has gotten sort of suddenly melancholy or downtrodden or angry, and Massaria has used sex to kind of snap her out of the woes and also get the heat off of herself.
Yeah. I loved this scene too, because I mean, everything that you said I agree with 100%. And also I like that it's from Massaria's perspective, kind of fixing some of the stuff, because Massaria's been a hard character to track this season emotionally, and I've been kind of unsure where she's been, because she's sort of unsure about her feelings towards Rhaenyra and her place in this court, and sort of being questioned a lot, and then helping Alicent a little bit, at least not like hurting Alicent is probably the better way to put it. So I've been a little bit unsure of how to track her character. This episode helped solidify me a little bit more on her, and I loved that sequence with again what was her name, Lady Madame Sylvie, because the other element of this too is she's saying like, oh, do you want me, you came here to want people to like fawn over you, of like, look at your new position, you're always just going to be a whore. And it finally let me a little bit more into Massaria, because it's like, oh, she's drawn to this sense of power too, and in a way Rhaenyra kind of represents this power to her. So not only just her like reassuring Rhaenyra and like trying to get forgiveness from Rhaenyra for like questioning her and sort of manipulation games she did earlier, but also like she's horny not just for Rhaenyra, but for like the place that closest to Rhaenyra gets her as well. So Rhaenyra sort of represents attaining this position that she's kind of wanted for herself, of like, look, I have won this spot. And she thinks she's doing it for other people, but she's Breaking Bad. She's doing it for herself. She's really doing it for herself, not for her family. And so that I kind of liked that, and it finally gave me it's like, okay, I wish that sequence with Madame Sylvie had actually come didn't need to come like episode 3 or whatever.
Sure.
But I wish we had gotten an episode like 5 or 6 this season, maybe an episode or 2 before this, just to help like, okay, here's a better in on her arc this season.
What is she up to?
Yeah, and like it's not even up to, it's more just like what's her interiority like, and I just got a sense of it this finally did.
Yeah.
And it made their sex scene messy, and again, some good subtext here. This is the psychosexual subtext I am looking for, Kim. It's not just the queer subtext, it's the psychosexual.
Totally.
Yeah, this was good stuff, and finally like has sort of redirected a criticism that I had with Massaria. I just wish it had come a little earlier, like just or like seeded this a little bit better throughout. But it works very well within the context of this episode. So yay, liked that. We did good show. And then I also like the acknowledgement of Rhaenyra talking about her father's vision and how he lived in a dream. And it's not explicitly said, and we've talked about this before, but like the fact that Viserys could live in a dream because he was a man, and he lived in peacetime. He didn't have all this nonsense about lineage going on, but also like was enabled in a way that many of these characters in the show, not just Rhaenyra, are not, Massaria herself included.
Sure. And like lived in peacetime, but arguably like it was a faux, that was a faux peace that was being asserted or established. And
they built the simulacra around it. Like Viserys got to have everyone in his world build the simulacra box around him, and no one was allowed to puncture his little simulacra box while he just worked on his little models. He built his little trains, and everyone else went off and dealt with his bullshit that he was ignoring.
Yeah, it was very gratifying to watch Rhaenyra say in real time, like all this deference to what Viserys would have wanted and did is getting me nowhere. And I was like, so stop doing it.
Well, let us move on to another sequence that I really, really love as we get into the finale of this episode. We have a couple scenes with Aegon finds his own form of redemption when the plan to sail to Essos is thwarted by more Rhaenyra loyalist soldiers on the march. He decides to stay in harm's way, making one last stand alongside Tyland, who lets Larys slip away alone, while letting Larys slip away alone. But the suicide mission becomes a virtuous return to life when Sunfire surprises everyone by arriving just in time to massacre the Mountain army. This was great. I actually really like this. This is a sequence of events that feels earned, because we've seen Aegon be a little piece of shit. We see that he had heart in season 1. Like, he wasn't just like someone who didn't care about other people, but he did end up being a little piece of shit. Need a little bit of humbling, needed to get off his Nepo baby platform, get his face shoved in poop, and get to like see how everyone again created the simulacra around him, see the simulacra punctured by Larys, and then Tyland kind of not fully breaking it, but not being able to like fully bring himself to like not break the simulacra, but also break the simulacra. I'm just making Matrix at this point. But like it's a good metaphor, because like these men like live in these boxes where no one will tell them the truth of anything. Yeah, and
it warps reality. 100%.
Yeah, and now we get to see a moment where he chooses to like to stand up and be like, I'll die. And he's even honest when it's like, why let Larys? Like, he knows Larys is being a bit of a coward, but he's like, like, what is he going to do here? Might as well let him go. And I like that there's a moment too, and it's a good moment with Tyland too, where right when the Mountain army shows up and Aegon thinks he's about to die, he almost runs away again. And Tyland's like, are you going to run, my lord? Are you actually going to do that? And I like the way the actor delivers it, because it's not judgmental. It's like not are you gonna run now? It's like
have we decided to flee?
Yeah, we chose.
It's like I gotta know the plan.
It was kind of like I need to know the plan and I'll follow you without judging. And and I like that, because it makes Aegon's choice to stay even more powerful, because it's not like he's feeling judgment. It's just sort of he had to question himself and just hear like, oh, this is the instinct that I'm doing. No, I'll turn and do it. And he chooses to be there. And then we get this glorious moment with Sunfire, who we've been talking about in the bonus episode. We'll talk about it more in the bonus episode about like when Sunfire showed up, because Sunfire's not dead in the books. And we were wondering if that was ever going to happen. And it's a glorious moment. And I love the like zombie-ish look to Sunfire. It was like, oh, gnarly. I love it. It was so cool. I always love like gnarly sort of gore stuff like that. Yeah, everything about the sequence I loved. Kim, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I feel like Tom Glenn Carney, who plays Aegon, has like really made a meal out of every like these kind of like small vignette check-ins that we're getting with his character this season. And the fact that he can play this guy as so equally like audacious and you know, really self-deprecating at this point at the same time, I think is a lovely contrast. I was like reading the hesitation in that moment. It felt to me like watching someone like get stage fright, like that
Yeah.
it was like less about him being like, oh no, I don't want to die, and more about him being like, oh, how do I make this really cool? And like, and him having to like hype himself up for what he thought was going to be his final stand. And it's I like the way that they sort of landed this plane with his intention to die turning into actually like a incredibly victorious, like, people are gonna hear about this type of incident. You know, history in the making. It's really fun when we watch it really feel like that's what's unfolding, and it's unfolding by, you know, pure magic or pure luck. And in this case, the dragon bond, and it really feeling like Sunfire, you know, got up from his deathbed to go show up for
like, oh, my boy's being honorable again. I can get up for this.
Or just like, or he is actually gonna die. I gotta go help him. Like, he needs me now.
Yeah.
Like, he didn't really need me too bad before, but like, he needs me now, and I'm gonna go emerge through the woods. Yeah.
Well, I like that it's kind of connected to both things. Is like, oh, Aegon is now worthy of like this connection with the dragon, and also like Sunfire wants to, you know, save, you know, the person that he has a connection to, or she, Sunfire, he, I forget.
Oh golly, I don't remember either.
They. Let's not gender the dragons. They're they them. All the dragons are they them kings or monarchs or whatever you want to call them.
I think it's true that we don't know the gender of a lot of dragons, and it like you happen to know.
They don't really know until they they lay a clutch of eggs, right?
I think that's right. But yes, I like also the fact that Aegon's, again, this speech that he presumably kind of like wrote in his head himself. I like that, again, this feels like a very like a real thing that happened, of like Aegon making this choice by himself and then deciding exactly how he was going to say and present it, and then it just happening to work perfectly well, and he's like delirious with joy that it went his way. But the fact that his speech is all about, again, legitimacy, like he calls himself Viserys' true heir. He emphasizes that he was anointed by the Septon, and that all of his speech is mostly tied to like the faith, and again, like these traditions that matter to like the everyday person of Westeros, but that the whole time the power that is emerging behind him, and like the reason why he's actually going to be able to proceed in this moment as king, is because of his dragon, and like because of his pure Targaryen power. I really liked kind of the, to me, surprise buildup that like that was like sort of the emotional high of the episode.
Yeah. Well, last thing to talk about this episode, we cut to Ormond's grand plan. He's been swaying Sir Ulf the White to his side with cozy camp good ale and the promise of Driftmark itself, as we see in this episode. And we have Ulf giving a devious little smile saying they will burn at the end there. And I like here the implication that we hear that Ormond's been doing this for a while, because he sort of reiterates, or it's either Ulf or he reiterates something that Ulf said in an earlier episode to Hugh about like these like words about lordships and everything. So it's like, oh, a lot of that rhetoric that he's been getting has been fed to him from Ormond this whole time, and playing mind games a little bit with Ulf here. So yeah, I thought this was a good, fun little manipulative reveal here by Ormond that I rather enjoyed. So very, very good, I think, ending on that point, and certainly dangerous for Rhaenyra as a dragon rider maybe turned. Possibly. We'll see. Yeah,
it is a really big piece that Ormond has like succeeded in moving, and apparently like without really the knowledge of anyone else. It did raise to mind. I was like, where is Hugh at? Like, has Hugh just happened to never catch any of these meetings? We haven't.
I'm sure like Ormond probably watches for which dragon's there and then goes out to that dragon.
That makes sense. It felt like validation to me that I had sort of pointed out that Hugh and Ulf and Adam are like being forced to live effectively as if they are hedge knights, which in of itself can be kind of seen as a signal of disrespect from Rhaenyra, and like specifically it's like little camp that Ormond has popped up around them. It feels like that in of itself is like the promise to Ulf, like you will be more comfortable over here on my side. And yeah, like it really unsettled me the way that Ulf was just like so chuffed with himself for agreeing to this deal and not satisfied with Ormond's suggestion that like, oh, they'll never laugh at you again, and him being like, no, I'm gonna kill a bunch of people.
Let's make sure they never will.
I'm gonna kill a bunch of people, actually. Yeah, pretty gnarly way to lead us into the finale.
Yeah, that is a much better cliffhanger than I think last week's episode, in my opinion. Where that was like, what, did he die? I was sort of like confused and lost. Here, I was like, oh, that's good. That's good. I'll take that going into the finale. So yeah, much better lead off here. So despite my mixed thoughts, hopefully this sets us up very well for a great finale of the season. But before we wrap everything out, I know, want to quick go over some of the unanswered questions that you have going into the finale next week. So Kim, what are some things that you think you and perhaps some of our viewers might be mulling over as we watch this on Sunday?
Yeah. Number one question, where actually is Vhagar? I find it really interesting that we haven't seen her at all since Aemond has arrived to Harrenhal, or since Aemond arrived, burned Harrenhal, and then nearly died. And I very much wonder if Alys Rivers has something to do with the fact that they are separated. Second question, what is Alicent's plan now that we just saw her like outside the doors of Harrenhal by herself? I can't imagine that she's gonna attempt to walk back to King's Landing by herself, and yet they haven't given us a ton of other like devices.
She'll hop in that fast travel port that apparently Westeros has now ever since season 7 of Game of Thrones. So yeah,
who knows? I really hope that we check in again with Joffrey next episode in this finale. I thought that like the detail of Rhaenyra being hesitant to reunite with him was so interesting, and then they haven't done anything else with that since, aside from her like watching him sleep one more time. But again, canonically, like Joffrey also has a little dragon with him, and again in the show, Rhaenyra's other 2 children have yet to be mentioned this season entirely, perhaps.
I think it might have been mentioned with Rhaena stuff where she's like,
right, she was supposed to be with them on the ship. That is the last we heard of them.
A few offhanded.
And then it occurred to me, I was like, is Sheepstealer gonna try to follow Rhaena back to King's Landing? We saw that he was like really wounded, but I keep like hoping that there's something more interesting going on with Rhaena, and hopefully her bond with Sheepstealer. And so that occurred to me of like, what is the end game here with Rhaena now being an outcast princess within her own people's castle? The Velaryons are all kind of scattered at this point. And I don't know, somehow Sheepstealer feels to me like a little like beacon of hope. Like,
we just want our little boy to survive. Just go eat your sheep, my guy. Just live your best life and eat your sheep. I want that for you. Well, we have reached the end of the episode. Any final last thoughts, Kim, before we wrap us out?
Mostly that I'm feeling more excited to head into the finale now than I was last week, but I'm still feeling that lost in the sauce feeling a little bit. So yeah, I don't know. We'll see where the ship lands. Docks?
Yeah. Docks? the dragon lands and the ship docks. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, with you, I talking this out with you which I always love doing, has made me appreciate some more things about this episode than I feel. But yeah, I come away from this episode still having my major issues with the Rhaena and Harrenhal storylines. But there's some other stuff here and there that I really did like. And we just want, if anyone wins the Dance of Dragons, I just want it to be sheepstealer. I think that's where I've come down on. And hopefully the finale will provide me that lovely, lovely conclusion. But yeah, I am, for all my complaints about this episode, I am still very excited for next week's episode. And that ending with Ulf was a very good beat to sort of give me a high to go into next week on. So I am excited for next week's finale, despite my reservations on this one. And we'll see if this season can turn it around for me in that last episode. But until then, that brings us to the end. Please don't forget to be on the lookout for our bonus episode later this week, where we'll go into our thoughts on how this episode compares to the book, and you can find out what the vague mea culpa was all about. If you do not know, we'll discuss that there. And if you want to send us feedback or have any thoughts you'd like the chance for us to consider reading on the show, again, email us at castofkings@gmail.com. Yet again, I also wish to say, please don't unsubscribe from the podcast after next week's episode. We will be doing a bonus episode discussing the season as a whole, and we may be continuing this podcast with some other episodes in the future. So get excited for that. And if you want to make sure you don't miss any of them at all, you can get video versions of the podcast at youtube.com/@decodingtv. And more importantly, if you want to support this show and other shows on the Decoding TV network, please consider becoming a paid subscriber at decodingtv.com, where you can also get ad-free episodes of this show and that bonus episode. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next week for the season 3 finale of House of the Dragon.
Bye.
Live long and prosper, everyone.